welcome and thank you to all of you who have taken the time out of your day to come and listen to me. And thanks also to everybody who is online. When I started putting this together, it was actually really difficult because my career has not been, maybe shall I say, smooth as we've kind of gone through. And it's been a career full of stops and starts, backward steps, sideways steps. And it was quite difficult to sort of think about how I could put something together that was vaguely coherent. And I remember someone, and I can't remember exactly who, I think it was probably after a failed interview or something like that, who said to me, you know, the problem with you, Lesley, is you lack focus. And I was like, well, yes, okay, that's probably true. I am interested in just about everything and anything, apart from sport. You can keep that. And you do lack focus. But I see that as a strength. And yes, it maybe has caused me a few problems along the way, but hopefully you'll see a little bit of that diversity in interests as I kind of go through this lecture. Anyway, the constant theme that I came back to in the end was fieldwork. And so this is a story of me and many other people in the field. So there's lots of photographs and not much content. Okay. Some embarrassing photos along the way as well. It's a personal reflection. Any of you who know me knows that I tend to talk probably a little bit too openly at times, and I can get a little bit emotional. I've promised my mum that I won't, but inevitably I will. So it's a personal reflection, but I am going to throw a few questions in along the way on what fieldwork is, what does it actually mean, and really sort of thinking about where fieldwork is going. So where are we heading to with fieldwork? And I want to start, I'm going to have to pick my paper up now. I'm going to have to start with a quote. It's from Francesca Savrakopoulou, which I probably mangled immensely, very well there. It was a book I read recently. It's actually a book about the physicality of God. I told you I read lots of different things. And I really liked this. She's talking about footprints and feet. It is a material memory of its owner, treading upon the surface on which the print appears, conjuring the presence of the whole body, the whole person. Our feet are not simply pedestals on which we stand or the motors by which we move, but the foundations of our presence in the world. And it made me think about the footprints that I have made in the world through my work, no matter how insignificant those might be. And in the end, fieldwork and being in the environment is about being in the world. And it's about establishing a relationship with that world. And that to me is what fieldwork is. And hopefully I will show you a little bit about where we're going, where my thought processes are going with this. So as I go through, I want you to think a little bit about what fieldwork means to you, and particularly how it makes you feel about your place in the world. But before we get to all that, I'm going to actually do my thank yous at the beginning. And I am going to do a little serious bit, and this is the bit where I might get emotional, so apologies if I do. This lecture is, told you I would, in memory of two very special people. My dad, Colin Batty, As you picture there in the field, looking rather bedraggled, with one of our many dogs that we've had over the years. Colin, Dad, was an amazing man and an incredible influence on my life. And the other person there is my sister Nick, who also sadly died a number of years ago. And again, she's in the field. She's on Dartmoor at this particular point quite a number of years ago. We were out in the field and we came across this cat going for a walk with its owners. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. And Nick was absolutely taken with this cat. It was brilliant. Anyway, so the lecture is in memory of my wonderful dad and my wonderful sister. My dad gave me some advice when I set off to university. He said, never pass an exam on your first attempt when the third attempt will do. Only ever do enough to scrape through. And do 90% of your studying in the 24 hours before the exam. Fortunately, I ignored some of that advice. Although I did do an awful lot of very late night cramming before the exams. That was a day when we did do a lot of exams. And I also want to thank a whole bunch of people. I would be here all day if I wanted to thank everybody who has been an influence on my life and has made it special. Every single person in this room, probably every single person online, and so many more. And so if I don't mention you along the way, I'm sorry. I really wish I could, but we all want to go for a drink afterwards. You know who you are, and you are very special to me. But there are a few people that I do want to particularly say thank you to. So my wonderful sisters, Janet and Suzanne, that you see on the top left-hand side there. Suzanne obviously is here today. Jan is online, hopefully, from Wales. My wonderful mum and dad. Mum is in the audience today, who's been an absolute stalwart and has always, always supported me, whatever I have decided to do. My wonderful friend Jo, who hates having a photo taken, so it's quite a remote photo. She's in the red jacket in the middle there, and we are in the field. It was on one of our COVID walks, I think, who's been an absolute fantastic friend ever since I arrived at Birmingham. And equally, my wonderful friend Phil, who you see in his lovely bow tie there. We went to the opera. To the amazing Gretchel, Margaret, Kay and Claire. Gretchel is in the audience, who were our admin team, who have all left now, but looked after me when I arrived in Birmingham, when I felt completely out of my depth. And they were just wonderful, wonderful people and have remained friends ever since. To the wonderful Laura and Liz, who are my more recent friends, I suppose, recent sort of 10 years, and great fieldwork buddies. And finally to Ian and Paula, who unfortunately can't be here today, but hopefully are online, although I think Paula is taking some children into the field at the moment. And their wonderful kids, Abigail and Elliot, who are my second family. So thank you to all of those, and thank you to everybody who I mention and don't mention. And of course, you all know that my cats are important. I can't not have pictures of these. These are my cats, past and present. So we're going back a long time here, as you can probably tell from some of the decor. I don't think I'd be here without my cats. They are amazing, every single one of them, and do their own field work in their own ways. Okay, enough of that. Let's crack on with field work. What is field work? So I thought, when I started thinking about this lecture, and thinking, field work, that's really, that's what hangs it all together. And I was like, but what do I mean by field work? So what sprang to your mind? You might sort of think about this. As soon as you say fieldwork or you saw the content of this lecture, what sprang to your mind immediately? So I did two things. First, I looked it up in the dictionary. And I did actually look it up in a physical dictionary. I still have one of those. And it said, practical work conducted by a researcher in the natural environment rather than in a laboratory or office. All right, that sounds okay. And then I thought, well, hang on a minute, what does it mean by natural environment? Because I'd probably call all the environments that I work in not particularly natural. We could get into a whole debate about what nature is and all the rest of it, but I won't do that now. But you'll see that maybe my idea about the field isn't natural. And then where does the digital environment come in here? Because more and more people are exploring digital environments. Could they be called the field? Because you can't do anything without doing artificial intelligence now, I thought I'd ask Gen AI, even though I do try and avoid using it. So I asked Gen AI, can you give me an image of an environmental scientist, a geologist, and a geographer in the field? And this is what it came up with. I don't know about you, I don't know any geologists who look like that. Kind of wish I did, but definitely not. The geographer, maybe, I was like, when was the last time a geographer took a globe out in the field or indeed a satchel? The environmental scientists at least look a little bit vaguely like they know what they're doing. But the one thing that you notice is, it's pretty male heavy, yeah? I don't recognise myself in these people. They all look rugged and outdoorsy and ready to camp and be at one with nature. That's not me. They also are in a field of some description. So they're in mountainous areas, they're in grasslands, they're in some sort of woodland. And that is the kind of image that we have with fieldwork, that people are out in some rugged environment, getting down and dirty with things and being fit and walking up mountains. That's not what I do. And it's not, I think, what fieldwork is. So let's think a little bit more about what fieldwork is. And we'll do that by exploring a little bit my experiences. So now we're going to go a little bit into my life, and we'll come back to what fieldwork is when I talk about teaching. So early days, I thought I'd embarrass myself before embarrassing other people. I was quite cute, wasn't I, really? So, early days. I was really fortunate. I grew up in a suburb of Manchester with lots of parks available to us to go in. And I was also incredibly fortunate that I was born into a family who liked doing that stuff. And we always had dogs that needed walking. So we always were out and about, even if it was the little tiny park down the end of the road. And we also had a nice garden. It was a big garden. It was completely wild, totally overgrown. I can't even describe it, but it was beautiful in its own way. So I was really fortunate because I had a lot of experience of going outside, of getting involved with nature. And as you can see, we have 3 photos here. You can see where I got my amazing dress sense, because this is my wonderful sister Suzanne on the left-hand side here with her sort of Doctor Who type scarf. And as you can see, I always liked a nice hat. So that's us. I also always liked to get involved and get my hands dirty. You can see me getting involved with the leaf litter layer there, playing with our dog Jade. And yes, we went to zoos as well, not very often. It's a real special occasion. This was me at Chester Zoo, not looking that impressed, I have to say. And you know, zoos have their problems, and particularly when in the 70s they had their problems, but it did give me that opportunity to see things that I wouldn't normally have seen. So this all gave me a real opportunity, I suppose, to experience the field, to experience being outside, of getting involved with the organisms, the soil. And in Nan Shepherd's book, The Living Mountain, she stated, the more one learns of this intricate interplay of soil, altitude, weather, and the living tissues of plants and insects, the more the mystery deepens. She isn't talking about science here, the gathering of facts. She was talking about her encounters with the mountain that she learnt over her long acquaintance with the landscape. And that really resonates with me because these kind of experiences allowed me to get acquainted with my environment and particular places. So I think the one on the left-hand side there was taken at Alderley Edge near Macclesfield, which has a real place in my heart and I feel very connected to. So our early experiences, and there's lots of research about the importance of early experience for connectedness to nature. I would say, yes, absolutely. It is fundamental to who I am. Okay, so that was my early days. I have to say, I also went to a wonderful primary school who took us on field took us on field trips and got us outside. And I remember one particular trip to the Peak District, and I can still remember looking at the dipper on the riverside and just that moment. And I probably was about 8 or 9, and I can still remember it. I then took myself off, or was sent rather, to our local comprehensive, which was an utterly miserable time. Less said about that, the better. The one thing I do remember about that was hardly any field trips. The one trip that we did go on was to look at, it was a geography field trip for GCSE, and we went to look at the housing stock of Stockport, which definitely put me off human geography pretty much for life. Although thanks to my wonderful human geography colleagues in the department, I've started to get a little bit of interest back. It definitely put me off planning, I'm afraid. Sorry, planning colleagues. So I left school because I hated it, let's put it that way. So I did my A-levels at Stockport Technical College. There I encountered Miss Asterley. She was my geology teacher there. Not many people did geology A-level, and certainly weren't any female tutors there, generally. She was inspirational, an amazing, amazing woman. She made everything interesting, and we did field courses. We went to Teg's Nose, which is also near Macclesfield, Tideswell Dale, various other places. And I just got the bug for geology at that point. So that was really critical. And boy, am I glad I went to Stockport Technical College. It was great, had a great time there. And then headed off to University of Sheffield. So this is my Sheffield days. Again, this is where I encountered some really inspirational teachers. And we got out and about and we did some more field work. So I'm going to just highlight some particular people here. So in the middle there is Mike Romano. and on the right-hand side is Martin White. So they were responsible for teaching me sedimentology and paleontology and the kind of history of the UK in terms of geological history. And they were responsible for doing all the field work. And we can see us, and that's me in the red jumper that you can see in the distance. Here we are in the northeast, on the northeast coast near Scarborough, messing about with geology, doing sedimentary logs and looking for dinosaur footprints and all sorts of great stuff. And they were really very inspirational. Got us, again, experience in the field, but most importantly, took their time to talk to us. Not just in the field, but in the classroom. You know, you could go to their offices and have a chat. Who knew? It was great. We talked about all sorts of things. And the other person that I want to highlight is Alan Baker, who is with us today. He ended up being my PhD supervisor. I'll come to that in a minute. But again, him and Brian Wheeler, who I don't have a photo of, were also incredibly inspirational. And there is one moment in the field, I don't know if Alan remembers this, he's looking nervous. And it was when we were in Wales, and you can see, this is the only picture I could find of us in Wales. Mike is in the audience here. He's pictured up there. But we went to a place called Paris Mountain on Anglesey. I'll show you a great picture of that in a sec. But I remember this one point. It's an acidic pit lake. Okay, it's full of horrible metals. It's vile. And I remember, and I think it was you, Alan, not Brian, said, if you dip your finger in that and put it on your lip, you will find that it's all tingly. You could sort of see people going, and of course there was someone who did it. Full of horrible stuff like copper and zinc and cadmium and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, but I kind of remember that particular point. But there was lots of things I remember about that field course in Wales. So we just went to Wales and Scarborough / Whitby. But those were really important field courses. And you know what? I remember so much about them, so much about the people. And that is because we were outside, immersed in our environment. Of course, fieldwork is great, especially if it's this beautiful sunny day. This is me in Dorset. I was with James Wheely at this particular point, having taught some geologists. Gorgeous spring day. Beautiful. What could be better than being in the field? Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, that's the reality. This is also from my undergraduate days. The same Welsh field course. This was after a day of digging soil pits, and if I didn't put you off soil for life, and it didn't, because it doesn't matter how bad the weather is. It's about that shared experience. You know, you're all miserable together trying to get something done. And it's that shared experience, that connection with the good and the bad that you get from fieldwork. And having sampled waters on the North Pennines in the middle of winter, yeah, it can be really, really tough. But it's still great in whatever way. It's still fantastic. I have a terror of cows. So we have also the experience in the field of encountering the things that we don't like. I only do stuff in the UK, but I'm sure many of my colleagues will tell you wonderful stories about going to tropical rainforest and dangerous insects. Mine is cows. And of course, that prevents you from doing your field work in some cases, and adds that extra layer of terror when you encounter a large herd of fields when you've been walking for several miles and you're like, I don't think I can cross this field. What am I going to do? But of course, at the end of the day, you can have a shared bottle of port in the back of the vehicle, as long as you're not the driver. So fieldwork to me, it is about that experience. It's about that memory. It's about that shared understanding of what you're trying to achieve. The camaraderie that can really come out in those field examples. Okay, so that was university. So I had a point there, and it really was from this field work that had kind of really captured, and those inspirational lectures that had really captured where I wanted to go. I could have gone lots of, I was interested in lots of things, but it was those two directions. So I could either go down the geology route, so really the paleontology, and Mike and Martin offered me a PhD, no funding. So that wasn't going to happen. Or I could go down the kind of plant-soil relationships, which Alan was responsible for, and particularly that industrial landscape. And I would have been happy with either. So in the end, it was kind of fate and that lack of money that made my decision for me. So I headed back to Sheffield and worked with Alan and Brian for the next 3 years on my PhD, and in all things industrial. So what was it that made me go down that industrial route? And it really comes back to this idea around being in the field, having a connection to your environment. I'm going to struggle to describe this. My sister is a poet. She's much better with words. I'm not. But I'm going to try my best. This is Paris Mountain. I stepped onto that landscape and just was blown away. I just stopped and went, wow. You might think, am I going, wow, what a mess? That's not really what I felt. Yes, I felt that. I felt that destruction, that complete desolation that human activity had left, this hole in the ground, the lack of vegetation. It was incredible, that sense of loss that I felt coming from that landscape. It's a scar, it's a physical damage to the environment. But that's just not what I got alone. I also got a sense of connection to history. So I thought about, how did this landscape develop? Thinking about the geology and appreciating it in all its glory, in this case, through the colours of the landscape. It doesn't come across here because it was a really grey day. But on a sunny day, wow, you get the bright orange, the blues of the copper, you get the green. It's just magical. And that's the geology coming to the fore. And then you get the smell. And it's the smell of metal salts, which I can't describe. It's just so distinctive. It's like being by the sea, but not quite. And then you get the sound, which is silent apart from the wind, because there are no birds up there, because there are no trees. So it's a sense of desolation. It's a sense of beauty. It's a sense of connecting to our past. And I felt that connection to the people who had created that mess, the miners who had been slaving away to expose all of those ores. And I still get that connection to all of those industrial landscapes. And these are some of the others that I visited. Some are, of course, heritage sites now, and so have preserved buildings. Others are pretty much all broken down. But whenever I go to those industrial sites, it's about I just feel that connection to history, to place. But it's also a positive feeling as well, because you get to think about, well, what comes next? Because you get the sense of nature coming back in, of things getting green again. Sometimes it takes an awful long time, and others it doesn't. And it's that experience, that field experience, the smell, the taste, the sound, the connection to history, the sense of time, that made me want to do industrial landscapes. And I get very excited when people say, yeah, we're going to go to an industrial landscape, or have you been to this mine? No. Okay, so that set me off. And it was that experience with Alan at Paris Mountain that really did it. So I headed to Sheffield, and I messed about for 3 years in the field, fortunately at Paris Mountain. And you can see me messing about with the mud, the contaminated mud. You'll notice without any kind of PPE, yeah, it's a while ago, yeah. I won't tell you what I get up to do in the lab. Things have changed. So what I was doing there was I was exploring the relationship between plants and the wetland soils in those contaminated environments. And I was particularly interested in the how those plants were growing in those noxious environments, and how the processes around the roots were allowing those plants to persist, what they were doing, where the metals were going, and also the interaction in terms of how the plants then affected the soil and the cycling in the soil. So I looked at 2 sites. So I did field work in Paris Mountain, but I also did field work at Mam Tor. This is actually a more recent photo when I went back there. Mam Tor isn't associated with the kind of mining that we see at Paris Mountain, which was copper mining. The drainage there, the metal-rich drainage, is actually caused by the landslip itself. So it's not to do with the mining, even though there's mining in the area. So I looked at both of those and did lots of field work. And I also tormented plants in the laboratory as well. So I did do quite a bit of lab work. Here's one of my plants that I tormented, looking rather sorry for itself. So I focused on a plant called Phragmites australis, which is a common reed. It usually grows about sort of 10 foot high in natural environments. But I was looking at those root environments, that relationship. And in particular, looking at these kind of metal precipitates that actually form around the root systems, which are a really important component of that interface between the pore waters and the soil and the plants themselves, and can sort of control how much metal and other nutrients are going up there. So I worked on that for 3 years, as I say, with Alan and Brian. Produced some papers, and enjoyed myself a lot. I think my PhD was fab. I really enjoyed it. I even enjoyed writing up. So it was a great experience for me. So at that point, I went, right, I do not want to go into industry. This is not what I want to do. I want to carry on. I want to carry on messing around in the field. And so I was very, very fortunate to get offered a job by Professor Paul Younger, who is very sadly no longer with us. He died far too early, up in Newcastle. and worked on constructed wetlands. So these are wetlands that have been built to treat mine drainage. And there's lots of them all around the country that you're probably not even remotely aware of, helping to clean up all of those old industrial sites that we have in the UK. And the thing about moving to Newcastle was it was a really, actually quite a critical point in terms of my understanding about what I wanted to do. Because Paul had put together a team to work on these wetlands. But the thing what I found particularly inspiring here was that Paul was a Geordie, through and through. In fact, when I first went up there, I couldn't understand some of the things he was saying because he had a really broad accent. He was brought up in the Northeast. He was in Newcastle University, and he was absolutely passionate about the Northeast. He loved his native county. He cared about it more than anyone I've ever met, I think. And that came through in his research. So the first project that I was actually kind of involved with was this one, Quaking Houses, which is a wetland built for treating the acid mine drainage that was coming off a spoil heap. But this was actually driven from the community. The community went to Paul and said, we've got this problem, how do we solve it? And that, to me, changed my perception of what research is. It's about being driven from the bottom up. It's about relationships with communities. And it's about caring about your environment and giving a shit. And the thing that Paul did as well was he brought together this whole diverse range of people. So we had geologists, we had engineers, a lot from industry. So we worked with the mining companies, we worked with Environment Agency, with the Coal Authority at the time, now the Mining Remediation Authority. We had hydrogeologists, we had hydrologists, we had microbiologists, we had social scientists, we had artists, and we had ecologists, which was me. And we brought them together, and Paul brought them together to work on a project. And that was astonishing to do. Remember, this is 20 years ago, before interdisciplinary became a thing. And it changed the way I viewed how I did my work, how I did science, and how important relationships were with the environment, but with people. And so I kind of get shifted a little bit, I think, in my thinking, really. And it was a really, really important time for me up in Newcastle. So I was there about 4 years. Did lots more messing about in wetlands, in constructed wetlands in and around the UK, and continued my work looking at the growth of plants and how they interacted with their environment. But most importantly, I think the thing that I kind of met, the most important thing that I got from that was that I helped to change perceptions of the role of plants in these systems. So they were very much dismissed as not being very important. It was the engineering that was important. So I kind of helped to work with engineers, to work with the other scientists, to help to understand that the plants were there and performing a really important role and could actually be critically important in achieving what they were setting out to do. And I also looked at things like the ecological value of these treatment wetlands. What else could they bring to the local environment? And I also worked on some other projects as well. So that was all great, and I really enjoyed getting out in the field. So then I finished my couple of postdocs and was like, right, okay, Bit of advice from a senior colleague: do 2 postdocs, and if you don't get a job, forget it. I'm not sure that really holds, but I took it to heart and looked for a job, and Birmingham offered me a job, amazingly enough. So headed back down south, and this is as far south as I've ever been, and sort of carried on what I was doing. So I did some more work. I looked at sediment pollution. So a lot of these sites are really eroded, you know, as you saw earlier with Paris Mountain, there's no vegetation on them. And some of the rivers come really close to these old mine workings. And so they pick up lots of sediment, which is all contaminated with metals. So we looked a little bit at sediment pollution. We looked at the importance of wetting and drying cycles, so the sorts of things that we're seeing at the moment with lots of flooding and then dry summers, and how that might influence the release of heavy metals into the environment. Something that is actually a potential environmental and public health risk. So my student Sarah Lynch did a lot of great work in this area, and we worked with Patrick Byrne up in Liverpool on this stuff. And then I expanded a little bit, went off in the direction of looking at organic contaminants as well as metals. Again, looking at phytoremediation, so the use of plants to remediate soils, looking at contaminated environments, because a lot of these industrial sites are not just mines. They're often, especially in urban areas, they've had multiple uses. They've got lots of different contaminants in them. So we were looking at more complex environments. And I had a series of PhD students, Senyat, Chigbo, Abdul, who all have been working on this, and we've published various papers associated with it. And we're still working in that field. So Akash Bazi, who's with us at the moment, who's supervised by Liz and myself, are carrying on this work and looking at these kind of co-contaminated sites, particularly these orphan sites in sort of industrial areas. This one is the one that Akash is working on, which is the Grand Union in the centre of Birmingham. It's a site that the community want to reuse, but is full of toxic metals. So we're looking at these kind of low-cost solutions. And I did some other work as well, some stuff on urban ponds with Ian Thornhill, who's here today, and various bits and pieces. Great, okay. So that was my field research. But about 8 years into my career, I really realised I wasn't actually getting the buzz from research that I used to have. There are lots of reasons why. I was getting the money, but a lot of my time was spent writing proposals that got rejected. I'm sure everyone's familiar with that who's an academic. I wasn't getting, yeah, we got some funding and got some research, but I was spending far too much of my time on trying to do something that didn't have a clear outcome. And it kind of comes back to my experiences at Newcastle, where I felt like I was making a real difference and things were happening in front of my eyes, and I was working with lots of people, and then I was just like, yeah, this is not doing it for me. And although it's still interesting, I realized that it was the teaching that was just giving me that buzz. It was that immediacy of making a difference. It was wanting to spend more time making teaching more exciting, more engaging, and helping others to realize their aspirations. And I kind of thought, do you know what, I want to do more of this. So I switched to an education-focused career about 12 years ago. And I've carried on doing the research, but I've focused on the education. I also, as Bill mentioned earlier, wanted to spend quite a lot of time on staff development as well, so helping people to meet their aspirations, a lot of building communities, building culture, but I'm not going to talk about that here because it's got nothing to do with fieldwork. Okay, so I switched to sort of focusing on teaching and learning, but fieldwork was still the core of this because I actually hate doing this. I hate standing up and telling people stuff. I like to engage with our students. I like to do small groups. I like to do workshops, and I like to be in the field with them. It's much more exciting for everybody. So I had two great groups of people that I ended up working with. So at the time, I was getting involved with the British Ecological Society. I was a council member, and I started getting involved with the education committee. British Ecological Society is a learned society. It's very research focused, and all their teaching at the time was very much about school level teaching. I don't do schools. Okay, that's not my thing. And I wanted to expand their remit to really think about higher education, because in the end, our ecologists are coming through university, many of them, to go into either the special interest groups or into the BES or into practitioners. So I took on committee chair for the education committee, and then we created the teaching and learning group with Alice, who's here today, and Dan Foreman, who's not here today. And we set up and Karen Devine as well from the BES, who was an absolute driving force behind this. And between us, we set up and moved the BES education. And we did lots of great things like creating education conferences, allowing people to share best practice, and actually doing some research, producing some papers about education. And also enhancing the value of education. So really saying, yes, this is as important as the research. And I also had the joy of meeting Derek, pictured here, and in the audience, and the rest of the Enhancing Fieldwork team, which involves Alice again, and a whole set of wonderful, wonderful people. And with them, I've basically moved or created a whole career now based on teaching and learning. And it is those connections with those people that have made a difference. So why do I focus on fieldwork with teaching? In the end, fieldwork is so important. And I come back to an example from that Robert Macfarlane in his book, The Old Ways, mentions. And he's talking about a friend here who walks foot transects in the Himalayas. And he walks the area again and again, and it gives them exceptional first-hand knowledge, and as he calls it, knowing through experience, or what we might call experiential learning. Okay, and that's what fieldwork does. It gives people that sense of experience. And I talked about that earlier in terms of my own career and the inspiration that I found. So how do we develop fieldwork? How do we enhance fieldwork? Well, the things that we've done, so we've looked at digital fieldwork. So Derek and the team started this with kind of thinking about how we take technology into the field. So obviously with tablets and things like that, you can do data collection and all the rest of it. But we also were looking at how you might create digital versions of the field. And so this is us, well, being my colleagues, creating some of these digital environments. So basically we go out and we can either film using 360 cameras to produce a kind of replica of the field experience, or we can do live broadcasts, and you can see that on the left-hand side there with Trevor Collins from the OU, who came and helped us do this. And you can see Joe Berry, who's in the audience, who used to work here, helping to do, or setting up, doing all the technological bits, which I can't do. So we can create these environments, but why would we do that? Well, the reason we do that is because it can enhance accessibility. So there are lots of people who cannot get in the field for whatever reason. I will always do my utmost to make sure somebody can get in the field. It doesn't matter what the situation is. But sometimes you can't. So creating these replica, if you like, or field excursions can help people to access what they might not be able to access normally. This is an example of a digital site. This is the Lickey Hills near Birmingham. And all of these little icons take you to something. So it might be a video of a close-up photo. So you can do things like species ID. It can play soundscapes. So you can get people to kind of almost be immersed in the environment. We haven't quite got smell escape yet, but it's kind of really useful tool to help people get out there. But it's also not just about that. It's also about preparing students. So many of our students nowadays actually don't have that experience that I had. They haven't been out in the field. They don't have that connection to nature. They feel really uncomfortable out there. They often just don't know what to expect. It can cause anxiety. So we can use these to prepare students to say, this is what might expect. They can buy the right kit for themselves and not come out in, inappropriate footwear. So it can be a preparatory tool. It can be it can replace where it's not possible for someone to go out there, but it's definitely not a replacement for fieldwork. But it can also give students examples where they can sort of practice stuff, so they can practice ID and things like that. So it's an enhancement. There are lots of other digital options that we can look at, and people have started using things like video games and that sort of stuff to enhance. But fieldwork is also about training. So I'm also interested in employability. So one of the things about fieldwork is it gives students those skills, not just technical skills, but those kind of skills that employers look for. Resilience, which is the big term that everybody uses at the moment. Dealing with wet, rainy environments, that sort of thing. Teamwork, all of those sort of things. So it can give people real important skills. But fieldwork is often a residential. Maybe a student might do a couple of residentials. They might do a few day field trips. But how can we get students out a little bit more? And so one of the things that we've done, and I've done with Joe in the audience, is to create a placement module. And this is about applied fieldwork. So this allows students to go and work with an organisation, not just big industry. It can be community groups, and it goes back to that sort of stuff that I did in the Northeast. And it's about getting students out and seeing how they can apply their knowledge in the real environment. And so we've got students here doing things like vegetation surveys for Sutton Park. We've got them going to landfill sites, very glamorous, to doing community engagement work, which you can see here, and even doing things in the virtual environment. And it's a real opportunity for students to go out and be more independent in terms of tackling field work, but in a slightly different context. And I tend to get the students do come back and go, that was fantastic. And also it transforms their experiences. So some of them will come back and go, I didn't realise I was going to enjoy that, and now I want to go and do that for my job. So it's a real transformative experience, and it comes back to what I was sort of saying earlier, just how important being in the field, being there is just makes the difference. It made the difference for me. It can make the difference for our students. So in Robert Macfarlane's book, he talks about Martin from the 1600s, and has a fantastic quote. "It is a piece of weakness and folly merely to value things because of their distance from the place where we are born. Thus men have travelled far enough in the search of foreign plants and animals, and yet continue strangers to those produced in their own natural climate." As many of you know, I do not travel. I do not like being away from home. I can just about cope with Wales, but farther than that, and I haven't had a passport for several years. But it is about thinking about what fieldwork is for and who is it for. We have a culture of expectation of going overseas. But I think we can help our students engage with the local environment. And I'm not saying particularly their home environment, I'm saying the Birmingham environment, getting them to understand what it's like to be in Birmingham. And so a lot of the field work that I do with my students is in Birmingham, or at least maybe as far as the peaks. So most of these photos are taken in and around Birmingham, within walking distance of the university. And I'm not saying that foreign field trips and going other places doesn't have their place. It does, because it opens people to new experiences, to different cultures and all the rest of it. But we have the problem is that we lose the sight of our own environment and how important that is, and that connection to our environment. Do we care when we're doing the field work? If we don't care, why are we doing it? So we need to think about sustainable fieldwork. And when I talk about sustainable fieldwork, I'm not just talking about carbon footprints, reducing those and getting us involved with or using our local environment a bit more. It's also about things like the damage that we might do to field sites, because everyone tends to go to the same sites. It's about financial sustainability, but it's also, I think, about that cultural sustainability. So that's the sort of stuff I've been doing with fieldwork, with a great set of people. And Derek and Dan Swanson from the University of Edinburgh and myself had this fantastic book last year, which was really the sort of, not the culmination, but it was definitely a real point at which we went, yes, we've brought all this together, all this thinking. I look rather dishevelled there because we were actually out in the field in the day and I'd got absolutely soaking. So we had our book launch last year, but we are also thinking about the future. So we're looking at raising some of these questions of, what does fieldwork look like? Does it need to be where we go at the moment? What is it for? Who is it for? Do the communities benefit? Because if they don't, should we really be doing it? We're thinking about sustainability. We're thinking about the digital environment. Our students maybe feel more connected to the digital than the real. So we need to think about the future of geography, field courses, and G's field courses, I should say. And so Dan, Derek and myself are currently working on a manifesto for fieldwork to look to the future. So I want to just finish by coming back to that idea around fieldwork. That point where I stepped onto Paris Mountain, that stays with me. It was that emotional connection to the landscape. I'd never been there before. It wasn't my home landscape, but I immediately felt an emotional relationship. That's what fieldwork, I think, can do. And everybody will have an emotional relationship with a different environment. I'm sure many people will step onto Paris Mountain and go, oh, what a bloody mess. But it's about finding that relationship. It's about finding that environment that you care about, and then you can do field work. You can do the research. So I want fieldwork to be for everybody, to allow everybody to find that inspiration. So I hope you've enjoyed listening a little bit about some of the work that I've done and the importance of fieldwork. And I'm sure you're all keen to go for a drink, but I think Nick has got to say something before we allow you to go. So thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you so much, Lesley. I'm not going to keep you long because I know people want to go and have a chat and have a drink. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Nick Kettridge and I'm the head of school for Geography, Earth and Environmental Sciences. And I'm really here just to give a huge thank you to Lesley for the presentation, the talk today, but actually more the actual time that you've been here at Birmingham. And I think it was really interesting what Phil that Bill said at the start, because it really reminded me of actually mix the two of you up is fine. The interactions that I've had. I remember coming to Birmingham because I was here, sort of joined in 2012, and one of my first memories of coming to Birmingham is actually sitting in the office with Lesley, coming as a fresh-faced academic, not really knowing what I'm doing in the world of education, and actually being sort of sat down with that kind of caring and supportive manner that Lesley has to actually help and guide and support me through what I was sort of looking at in my kind of career going forwards. And that's the kind of relationship that I think is sort of sat, and I've been in the office next to her for more than sort of 10 years. And it's that support that I think really defines her role within the school, because as I'm saying this, I'm sure many of you are thinking about conversations that you've had where Lesley sort of sat there and supported and guided you. And that's really been her position, that she sat as that figure within the school that I think we are all so hugely kind of thankful for. And I think she's really developed from that. I don't think she realizes the extent to which she has become that role model within the school. And I think particularly that role model amongst the education-focused staff of what it is that we can achieve, how important this is, and really showcasing education within the school and within the university more widely. And I think the thing that's really been recognised is, as she's been granted this professorialship, the extent to which that has supercharged that the way that people have looked up to her and how it's rebuilt the aspirations of staff around the school. I don't know how many times I've had kind of conversations with staff over the last few years where Lesley's kind of name has come up in terms of opportunities, where we can go, the support that we can provide, the career direction that you could actually kind of take. And in amongst that, I often sort of say, oh, you can chat to Lesley as well. We can even set up some mentoring. And the number of times it comes back, I'm already doing that. And those conversations are already happening. She's already supporting staff behind the scene, that hidden workload that happens. But beyond that is that reputation that she's building in terms of fieldwork you've been talking about today, but also that you're just sort of touching on in terms of employability as well, leading in these areas before they were really sort of front and center in terms of our agendas, really being the trailblazer in these different areas. Employability, I mean, we can't sort of talk about employability without talking about the placements, opportunities, how we've had this kind of growth of modules from students of around 25 onto our placement modules, now more like 125 students going through this, and being something that is being showcased across the college and across the university. Again, being right on the front foot, seeing the opportunities, but going well beyond that now in employability, recognizing that employability sits at the heart of everything that we do with our students, all the interactions, all the support that we're providing. And also with fieldwork, as you've gone through today. And I think really recognizing the importance that it plays within the education that we have. I mean, the things that jumped out to me was that I mean, particularly the sensory experiences that you get within the field, those moments of enthusiasm that kind of capture and direct you in terms of the careers that you want to take. The inspiration, the resilience that develops from field courses. They're so important, and it's so great to have those people that are highlighting and pushing that importance with students and within our education that we undertake. But ultimately, as I know, I said I was going to be short, so I realise I am standing in front of people and drinks. But ultimately, it's just to say an absolutely huge thank you to Lesley for all the work, all the support. And ultimately, I'm really excited to see where things go from here. So also, I just want to finish with a final thank you to Lesley for amazing, and we can start the clap even with the little ones nice and early on, to say a thank you to Lesley for all the work. And yeah, I look forward to seeing how this develops in the future. Thank you very much.